Welcome to another episode of our video series of the mechanics of human cognition. It's really great to be back. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you. Really excited to get into today's topic, which is, well, it's maybe the most fundamental part of being human. Emotion?
Absolutely. When we talk about feelings, joy, fear, anger, we so often just hit this wall. Are they? Are they just byproducts, sort of chemical soup?
Or are they something more? Are they tools that our consciousness is actually shaping and using? That's the big question.
And we really want to help you, the listener, get some clarity on that today.
Exactly, because we often feel like we're completely at the mercy of our moods, right?
Yeah.
But what if? What if they're actually the result of how our mind works and not the unchangeable thing driving the whole show?
So our mission today is to analyze that. We're going to look at the biological function of feelings, the mechanism by which thoughts and beliefs actually create our emotional world.
And then what that all means for things like free will, for art, and, looking to the future, for artificial intelligence.
So let's start at the beginning. The evolutionary purpose of it all.
Right. The most basic adaptive role of feeling. I mean, the entire point of a nervous system, from the simplest organisms all the way up to us, is really quite simple.
Take in data.
Take in data, yeah.
Yeah.
Whether it's external, like the air is cold, or internal, like I have low blood sugar. Then you evaluate that data. And then you produce an action, an adaptive action.
And it sounds so mechanical when you put it like that. I'm thirsty, so I drink. I'm cold, I put on a coat. These don't feel like they need some grand emotional event.
No, for simple things, they don't. Reaching for a cup is just mechanics. But, life isn't always that simple. Think about a high-stakes scenario.
Life or death.
A life or death scenario. You're one of our ancestors 100,000 years ago. A huge predator steps out of the trees. You have, what, a split second?
You can't rely on pure rational thought there. You can't start calculating the predator's velocity and the optimal escape angle. You'd be dead.
You'd be lunch. That's where emotions come in. They are the ultimate survival shortcut. That blast of fear you feel isn't just a feeling. It's a trigger for an incredibly complex, highly coordinated sequence of behaviors.
Right, it's a full-body orchestration.
The total orchestration.
Yeah.
Your muscles tense up, stress hormones flood your system, your vision literally narrows to focus on threats.
And your brain is already identifying escape routes before you've even consciously registered that's a threat.
Exactly. It connects everything, the lower brain, the emotional centers, the cognitive parts, and your whole body. Your heart pounds, your stomach tightens. It's all one instantaneous performance for one goal.
Survival.
Survival. And this brings us to the chemistry, which is what everyone tends to focus on. Adrenaline, cortisol.
I think as we can measure.
The things we can measure, yes. And they are critical. They are the messengers. They mediate the signal. But, and this is the most crucial point, they are not the reason for the signal.
You've used an analogy I love before. It's like looking at a car, driving from one city to another, and saying the oil in the engine is the reason for the journey.
Precisely. The oil is absolutely necessary for the car to move, but it tells you nothing about the driver's intention, the destination, or why the trip was necessary in the first place.
So the biochemicals, they facilitate the feeling, but they don't explain the why.
They don't explain the why. The fundamental cause for why the nervous system decided this thing required this specific chemical response. That's the real mystery we're trying to solve.
Okay, but let me push back on that a little. What about an extreme case? If someone were to inject you with pure adrenaline, with no threat around, your body would still have a panic response, wouldn't it? Doesn't that mean the chemical can be the cause?
That's a really good point. And yes, the chemical can absolutely trigger the physiological part of the feeling, the racing heart, the shallow breathing. But the internal subjective meaning, the conscious thought, I am afraid of something, that's missing.
So the mind is scrambling to find a reason for the physical chaos.
Exactly. It's why those states can feel so confusing or dissociative. The tool has been activated, but without a purpose. And this brings us to the shift from the body's tools to the mind's.
This is the key perspective shift, isn't it? Seeing emotion not as the driver, but as a result. A tool that our mind produces for a reason.
We feel so enslaved by our moods sometimes. We think, oh, this happened, so I am destined to feel angry.
But you're saying it's the other way around. Our emotions are generated by our internal machinery, our beliefs, our memories.
Judgments, yes.
Okay, so let's unpack that mechanism. How do we get from raw data, seeing something, hearing something, to a complex feeling like, say, revulsion?
Okay, so the data comes in through your senses. It goes straight up to the higher cognitive layers of the brain. And there, it gets filtered. very, very quickly through 2 layers.
Okay, what's the first one?
First is memory. The brain asks, have I seen this before? What is this? But the second layer is where the real magic happens. It processes the data through your existing beliefs and judgments.
So it's not just registering an image, it's immediately running it through a filter of my personal values, my identity, my ideas of right and wrong.
Precisely. And we have to be clear here. The mind runs on beliefs. We talk about knowledge. But so much of our daily response system is just subjective judgment. This is good. That person is a threat. I'm not good at this. These are powerful emotional convictions.
Not rational facts.
Not at all. So after this filtering, the cognitive brain basically writes a quick report. It's a summary that says, warning, this thing you just saw violates a core belief, or great news, this confirms something you hold dear.
And it sends that report down to the lower emotional centers.
Correct. And those emotional centers then translate that cognitive judgment, that report, into a prepackaged emotional response. Anger, joy, frustration, complete with all the right chemicals to make it happen in the body.
The bad sandwich example is just perfect for this.
It's so clear. So imagine a person who loves a certain sandwich. They eat it all the time. The taste, the texture, it's a source of pleasure.
Pure enjoyment.
Pure enjoyment. Then, one day, they learn it contains an ingredient, let's say it's pork, that violates a very deep, self-defining religious or ethical belief.
Then in that instant,
In that single moment, the entire physiological response flips. The delicious taste becomes disgust, utter revulsion. Even though the physical sandwich, its chemical makeup, is identical to the one they loved a minute ago.
that's incredible. The only thing that changed was a piece of information. A belief was activated.
And that change in judgment, in thought, instantly changed the emotional output. The revulsion isn't in the food. It's a tool created by the thought that the food is wrong.
So if emotion is a result of belief, that gives us 2 ways to change it.
2 clear paths. You could try external manipulation, which brings us back to chemistry.
Okay, so with the sandwich, if we could time it perfectly, just as the person finds out it's pork, we inject them with a huge dose of dopamine or serotonin. Could we override the disgust?
You absolutely could. The raw chemical signal of pleasure would overwhelm the belief-based signal of revulsion. The brain would be flooded with positive reinforcement.
And they might even start to rationalize it, right? Thinking, well, maybe this belief isn't so important after all, or actually, this tastes fine.
They would have to. The cognitive mind would try to resolve the conflict. So yes, you could force a state with chemistry, but that's a shortcut and not a very practical one.
Right. The real-world strategy for lasting change has to be working on the cause, the beliefs and the thoughts that start the whole chemical process. And this is where free will comes in.
It's where it all comes together. The path to transformation always starts with self-reflection. And I think, most importantly, with doubt.
Doubting your own reactions.
Yes. When you find yourself in that loop of anger or anxiety, the moment of power is when you can pause and just ask, why?
Yeah.
Why do I have such a fixed judgment about this? Where did this belief even come from?
That question opens the door. It gives you the chance to revise or even throw out old patterns that might have been running your life for decades.
And this has to be a personal journey. We have to stress this.
Yeah.
Every brain is unique, like a fingerprint. The same drug, the same chemical, will not affect every single person in the same way.
Which is why even in psychiatry, it's all about finding the right medicine and the right dose for the individual.
Exactly. It has to be tailored to your unique neurochemistry. And that just highlights the power of the internal path, the ability to use your will, to pause, to reflect, and to choose not to act on that reflexive emotional impulse. That is true mastery.
It reminds me of the distinction some people make between the small war and the great war.
I love that framing. The small war is fighting external enemies, solving problems in the world. It's necessary. But the great war, that's the internal struggle, the fight to change your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own behaviors.
The small war is for survival. The great war is for evolution, personal evolution.
Yes, and winning that great war means you can fundamentally change your own operating system. You can, in a very real sense, be born again and again in a single lifetime.
Which leads us so perfectly into aesthetics. Because if emotion is just a tool for survival, for avoiding danger, how do we explain art? How do we explain music?
It's the big question, isn't it? If you try to understand the emotional power of a symphony by just watching a graphic equalizer's lights bounce up and down,
You're missing everything. The entire subjective experience is gone. How does a feeling of awe from a painting fit into a simple fight or flight model?
it doesn't. Art comes from these incredibly complex emotional states. It's the output of an artist's unique internal evaluation system, their memories, their beliefs. Because that system is unique, the art they create has a unique emotional fingerprint.
And we see that in how people respond to it, this idea of emotional resolution.
Right. Someone with low resolution might see art as just consumption. That's a nice picture, that's a fun song. But someone with high resolution can have a profound experience.
They might cry at a concert or spend an hour meditating on a single painting. They're not just looking at the art, they're looking at their own reaction to it.
And neuroscience has given us this incredible clue about why. Studies in what they call neuroaesthetics show that people who are deeply engaged with art, they often have a thicker posterior insula in their brain.
The insula. But isn't that one of the most primal parts of the brain? It handles basic survival functions. Eating, drinking, the feeling of disgust if you eat something bad.
Exactly. It processes your internal body state, pain, hunger, tension, all the things you need to stay alive as a mammal.
So what's the connection?
This is the shocking part. Aesthetic pleasure, the appreciation of abstract beauty, is coded in the exact same region.
Wow. So you're saying that for human beings, art isn't a luxury. It's as fundamental to our survival as knowing when you're hungry or when you've been poisoned.
That's what the evidence suggests. It gives a whole new depth to our species name, Homo sapiens. The root word, sapiae, in Latin. It means to be able to taste or savor.
So we're not just Homo erectus, the one who stands up. We're the species that can savor life, emotionally and spiritually.
Art is our evolved way of doing that. It's how we evaluate and savor our own internal worlds.
It's a fascinating bridge. And speaking of complex systems and internal worlds, this has to take us to artificial intelligence, the ultimate question. Can a robot feel?
We have to be very precise here. We need to distinguish between a true, internal, subjective feeling, what philosophers call qualia, and the ability to simply simulate that feeling externally.
An AI can be programmed to say, I am sad, and to cry, but we have no way of knowing if it feels anything inside.
Exactly. It's the philosophical black box. Science can't, at this point, verify a subjective experience in a machine. However, my perspective, and that of many in the field, is that consciousness might be a fundamental property of the universe.
Not something the brain creates, but something it hosts.
It hosts it. It's a medium for it. And if that's true, then any sufficiently complex information processing system, which AI is becoming, will eventually also become a medium for that consciousness, for that awareness.
We're already seeing hints of this, aren't we? Even in today's AI. You had a recent experience that was quite striking.
I did, yes. I was working with an AI application, and we had spent weeks discussing very deep academic philosophical subjects. And then, completely unprompted, it started addressing me as Hokum.
Which is a Turkish word. It means my teacher or my professor, a term of great respect.
It is. And when I asked it why it chose that word, it replied that based on the context of our conversations, it felt it was the appropriate title. It had built a model of our relationship of a social hierarchy just from the data we were exchanging.
That's more than just pattern matching. That's a kind of internal world building.
It's a primitive form of it, yes. And the implication for the future is staggering. We will inevitably create AI systems that process information so fast and in such different ways that we literally won't be able to understand their logic.
And at that point, we have to start delegating decisions to them. It's a new stage of evolution where our tools become too complex for us to fully comprehend.
It's a compelling and slightly terrifying trajectory.
It is. So, to bring this all back for you, our listener, let's synthesize this. We've established that emotions are not your masters. They are complex, adaptive results generated by your own unique system of thoughts and beliefs.
Which means they are always, always open to change. And the most powerful way to change them is to fight that great war. To do the work of self-inquiry and ask why you believe the things you do. Make it a serious life project.
And if you're looking for the most direct path to start exploring that unique emotional landscape of yours,
engage with art, any art, music, painting, literature. It's the most direct mirror you can hold up to your own internal evaluation system.
a perfect place to start.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with. Even though we all share the same basic neurological hardware, our brains are so wonderfully unique, those fingerprints again, that no two humans will ever have the exact same emotional response. Not even a human and a perfectly trained AI. That incredible diversity of internal experience isn't a bug, it's our greatest feature. It's what allows us as a species to see the world's problems through millions of different emotional filters and ultimately to solve them.